Increasingly, I think of myself as a historian, not just of games, but of digitality. And I'm really concerned with this question of how this period will be remembered. Games provide part of the answer to this, because games from the 1980s are artefacts from the moment when we transitioned from analogue to digital ways of living. They are markers from the road to our becoming digital, if you will. And I would want to shout out here to the people who've paved the way for the work that our team has done. People like Andreas Lange and Henry Lowood, who very clearly articulated the future historians need to have access to our software and what we did with it as long ago as 2001. And Andreas, I remember vividly giving a talk that is. Sorry, I'm a little bit jet lagged, so we'll go with the kind of circles that my head's spinning in rather than fight them. Andreas gave a talk at DIGRA in 2003, the first DIGRA conference, all about the need to be working with fans and collectors of games and on the urgent task of game preservation and game history. Today I will offer some reflections on collaboration, undertaking research into building a game archive, undertaking game history and doing game preservation work. I will often be doing this through the lens of the Play It Again project, and you saw our logo on the front slide. Play It Again is the name of an Australian and New Zealand game history and preservation project, now multiple projects, which I'll tell you about, which I assembled and lead. We first secured funding from the Australian Research Council in late 2011, following a pilot project that was funded in 2007 by my former university in New Zealand. It took us about 6 years to crack it with national level funding, just to kind of put things in context. The Play It Again project was and is deeply collaborative on about 4 counts. The team, working with fans, collaboration between researchers and cultural institutions, and then collaboration between fans and researchers and cultural institutions. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so it's not just about me. There's a big team of people that are involved in this project. So the first Play It Again project ran from about 2012 to 2015. It was focused on games that were written for microcomputers in 1980s Australia and New Zealand. And this was us at a conference that we ran in 2014 that Jaakko and Maria and some other people came to. And this is some more of the team from New Zealand, from the New Zealand Film Archive. So it's a very multidisciplinary team comprising myself, Denise de Vries from Computer Science at Flinders University, Helen Stuckey, now at RMIT in Melbourne, and Angela Dalianis at Swinburne University also. In collaboration the first time round, it was with my former colleagues from Victoria University of Wellington. We had a couple of computer scientists and also an IP lawyer, Susan Corbett. These are the vital stats from that first round project. We had the Berlin Computer Spielmuseum, Andreas and Winfried Bergemeyer, and also the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, and the New Zealand Film Archive, now Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision, Ngā Taonga being Māori for our treasures, which I think puts it beautifully. They're treasuring sound and vision and games in there as well. Okay, so you notice we got some money. We didn't get a lot of money. It's quite amazing what we managed to do with a relatively small sum, and I think that's quite encouraging. This is a kind of pillars slide, if you like. I'm getting a bit of feedback here. I'll just drop that down a bit. Which shows the kind of different aspects of the project. It's a very multidisciplinary project, the different people, the different organisations that were involved. And the second iteration of the project is just about to start. Again, this is a collaboration with ACME, with the addition of Seb Chan as a partner investigator, formerly of the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt Museum, if you know about collecting of apps. They famously took Planetary and put it on GitHub. We also have the addition of Arnett. If you can see in the top slide, the top image, this is the new team assembled. ARNet are the internet gurus in Australia who basically run the internet between universities. OpenSLX is going to be the representative body of the Freiburg researchers who have built emulation as a service, and UNESCO Persist. And if you don't know what that acronym stands for, you're forgiven. Platform to enhance the sustainability of the information society transglobally. Just runs off the tongue, doesn't it? This is a project of the Memory of the World project, set up to ensure long-term access to the world's digital heritage. And I tried to keep it simple, but these are obviously large partnerships. In both projects, fairly obviously, the whole is much more than the sum of the parts. Not everyone is across everything, not everyone needs to be across everything or understand everything, but obviously they need to be able to communicate what they're doing in their part that they're expert in to the rest of the team. And I've just left this on the bottom of the slide. This is another project that I've recently been awarded funding from the ARC to run, and it will run simultaneously with the Play It Again project, and it's a media arts preservation project. I'll say a little bit more about that towards the end, but it's really exciting to have both, and I think there will be a range of synergies between the two. Okay, so the projects are structured in this way with all these partners, partly because of the Australian Research Council funding model that we are working with. It's called a linkage program. And linkage programs promote national and international research partnerships between researchers and business, industry, community organisations, and other publicly funded research agencies. It's a good fit for this area of work for many reasons. Collaboration is key for digital preservation research, not just because of the different skill sets required, but because institutional collaboration is required to find and develop answers to the challenges. Not everyone can do everything. Not every museum or institution can have the full set of skills within their team, and this is widely recognised. For instance, UNESCO's Vancouver Declaration urged, quote, a multi-stakeholder platform for the discussion of digital preservation in 2012, end quote. And the CSIRO GLAM Innovation Study, do you know that acronym, GLAM? Do you use that here? Yes? Okay, good. This is a government research organisation in Australia. They did a study on the GLAM sector, and they argued that within Australia, quote, the preservation of born digital material urgently requires a coordinated national cross-sector standards approach to avoid losing access to digital heritage, end quote. So, the Linkage Project model is also quite a good fit because cultural institutions need to be involved in digital collecting and preservation of complex digital artefacts. I argued this many years ago. They endure, basically, project funding doesn't. Our project will last for 3 years, and then what happens? And you need to give thought to that. It makes sense to have cultural institutions involved. Initially, there was some reluctance, though, I have to say. Notice the wording of the aims of our first project. I think it's in 2, to develop a collection of 80s games and inquire into what a collection of Australian digital game software more generally would look like. Those words were very carefully chosen. These organisations didn't want to throw themselves in and put their hand up and say, yes, we'll do it all. You're all off the hook, all the rest of you. Because at that point, it was seen as really hard. And so ACME and the New Zealand Film Archive were dipping their toe in. And that's okay. It was a start. And from a start, we can build on that. So, I think this project, the Play It Again project, was the first digital preservation project to receive research funding, at least in our part of the world. Getting the New Zealanders on board was, I think, key to our success, as well as having Andreas's team on the application. It really helps having an international partner, and I think that's something that we can support each other in doing, in lending weight to each other's applications. The Kiwis in particular, I think, gave confidence because there were suddenly 2 moving image museums who were prepared to put their name to the endeavour. Research funding can be highly politicised in Australia, and so should there have been ridicule from anyone about taxpayers' money being spent on games, they could potentially back each other up. Two, quite simply, is better than one. But things have changed. As a former Prime Minister of Australia, who I like to quote, John Howard used to say, "The times will suit me." And as this heritage material gets older and more fragile, people are coming around to the realisation that it matters and that we risk losing it if we don't act now. The linkage model is also very suitable because there's a lot that researchers can do for cultural institutions. These are busy people who often don't have time in their day-to-day jobs to solve some of the more complex problems that come with these types of artefacts and their preservation. Whereas we can put a PhD student on a wicked problem for 3 years and let them really drill down into it. Okay, there is quite a strong emphasis in Australia on outcomes that are useful to industry partners. And so there's a need to think quite creatively about what partners need that you as a researcher can provide, or you and some others can provide for mutual benefit, but that will still fit within the definition of research. And this is the definition from the Linkage Project funding rules, if you want to have a look. Sometimes you have to think quite laterally, and sometimes you can get this together with multiple partners who can provide some of what each other needs. And again, the sum being more than, the whole being more than the sum of the parts. And that's really what we're now embarking upon with Play It Again too. So these are the aims of the second project. In aim 4, for instance, we are going to be piloting emulation as a service. And ARNet, the networking gurus, they, as well as ACME, are really keen to gain first-hand experience of the value of this technology, providing the chance to gather data and evaluate it running in a range of configurations. Emulation and cloud platforms are key technologies for accessing legacy software and other born digital heritage items. Emulation as a Service is an open source platform which provides access to preserved digital assets, allowing users to interact with the virtualised original computer environment. It's been developed by a team of researchers at the University of Freiburg in Germany, including Klaus Reckert and Dirk von Suchodolitz. It's the most developed of the emulation solutions at present, potentially a very valuable tool for displaying complex digital artefacts in GLAM institutions. But organisations have little experience working with it. So our use of emulation as a service is a central part of the project, and it will be the first installation in the Southern Hemisphere. 1990s games are ideal content with which to evaluate an emulation solution, as they frequently required cutting-edge peripherals, graphics cards, etc., and a fast network. Installing emulation as a solution will critically enable us to gain first-hand experience of the value of this technology, providing the chance to gather data and evaluate it running in a range of configurations. The project's evaluations will enable the partners and other institutions to assess, including UNESCO Persist, to assess the utility of this emulation solution, to inform future decisions at an institutional and potentially inter-institutional level. Trialling and evaluating emulation as a service will fulfil needs that are critical for planning for the future provision of legacy-born digital content, including an exhibition-like environment so we can assess the platform's efficacy for the GLAM sector. The current project is thus likely to seed future innovation around the safeguarding of and access to Australia's digital cultural heritage, with the new knowledge likely to inform future infrastructure bids. So that is how we're setting it up. That was just a little bit from our funding application I was reading. So yeah, I always try to sort of set the next one up from the one before. So in the first project, these were some of the collection categories that we wound up with, but how we got there is perhaps worth just filling you in for a couple of minutes on. We first of all listed all the games that we could find that were locally written for micros on 2 spreadsheets, and we came up with about 700 plus for Australia and more than 200 for New Zealand. Then we developed a target list of what we thought were significant titles. So it's very difficult to come up with a target list if you don't know what actually existed. So I think that initial research was quite significant in terms of finding, the universe of what was out there. And this consisted of about 114 titles for Australia, attempting to acquire these and preserving those that we were able to get hold of. And we're talking about around about the 50 mark here. And we're going back and picking up the cartridge games we missed first time round in the second iteration of the project, because we didn't look at consoles. With the New Zealand games, we couldn't find a lot of the games from New Zealand. The ones that we know of are in private hands, and so we weren't actually able to buy many of them or acquire many of them because they are ultra rare. So it was a kind of ad hoc basis where collectors would supply copies to the New Zealand Film Archive, which is pretty concerning. It's kind of already gotten to the point where we can't find this, we can't buy this material. So these were the curatorial rationale or the selection criteria, such things as local content, people who went on to become important game developers, etc. We wanted to have some of their early works, including homebrew games, which is a topic dear to my own heart. And I'll show you some screenshots of some games a bit later on. The second iteration of the project, these are the whoa, I don't know what I just did. There we go. I don't know where the pointer is there. These are the second Play It Again project. And you can see, as you'd expect, they're developing with the way that the technology developed in the 90s. I'm a big fan of a selective approach, not only because I don't see much point in completionism, but also because practically as a researcher, I wouldn't want to have to trawl through everything in order to do my research. I'm already undertaking a project at the moment which is way too big, the history of creative microcomputing in Australia between 1976 and 1992, and I can tell you there's a hell of a lot of material. So the appeal to what future historians might need, a la Lowood back in 2001, I would have to say is a double-edged sword. We need to make sure that there will be enough, but I don't think we need everything. Okay, so from the beginning, fans have really been key in our projects. As Andreas made clear that all those years ago, it's thanks to fans that so much has survived, and also that various techniques in software preservation exist. Collaboration with fans features centrally in our project aims, as you saw. We owe a lot to fans. Technology, for instance, we image with the cryoflux, and here's Denise in the lab with our research assistant demonstrating imaging with the cryoflux to staff from the State Library of South Australia. This is just a web blurb on the technology called the 1541 Ultimate with tape adapter, which is being built by a fan, Gideon Schweitzer, for the Commodore 64. And it allows you to turn Commodore 64 tapes into tap files. So here is Nick Richardson in the lab. He is the Collections and Access Manager at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, making a tap file from a game called Judge Dredd, which is on the screen there, on the original hardware. So then he's playing it back from the SD card. And now, of course, we have the Apple II community and John Keone Morris's Apple Source and 4AM's software that automates cracks called Passport. Not to mention emulators. As Frank Cifaldi recently tweeted, emulator authors should have statues erected in their honour. And it's not just games that are benefiting here, as the case of the Carnegie Mellon Club recovering Andy Warhol Amiga discs demonstrates. Until recently, digital game and media art preservation were complementary yet distinct spheres. Despite some lingering elitism, it is now widely recognised that emulators created by enthusiasts to play vintage games also offer an effective means of accessing other historic coded works, including art. Methods and insights. I don't know if you know, Andy Warhol was given a computer by Amiga and asked to perform using it at the launch and he did portraits of Debbie Harry on stage. But these guys are the heroes. They're the ones that recovered the discs. They're the Carnegie Mellon Computer Club. So, methods and insights from game archiving are finding a place in media arts preservation, and this is a project that was done at Cornell University Library with the Rose Goldson Archive some years ago, which adopted emulation as a solution, as our other project will be doing. Okay, so on the terminology fan that I'm using here, it's intended to reference the fan studies discourse, which actually needs revising to appreciate the significant extent to which fans have not only been long-standing digital content creators long before the advent of the internet, but also enthusiast engineers, electronics technicians, and hardware hackers. And this is an argument that I make in detail in my new book, which I just have to make some revisions on. It will be out hopefully next year, called Homebrew Gaming and the Beginnings of Vernacular Digitality. It will be out with MIT Press in the Game Histories series, finally. So we literally had fans helping us with the preservation and the imaging of tapes and discs. In this photo you can see Carolyn Chong, who's an archivist in her own right, now an honours student studying the challenges of preserving mobile games with me, and retro game developer, oh, not in this slide, next slide, Rob Caporetto, who volunteered at Acme. He was demonstrating the 1541 Ultimate and how to image C64 tapes. In a satellite project that I ran with Denise with the State Library of South Australia, we sought to bring groups together who don't usually collaborate. So a computer preservation group for the Australian computer called the Micro B, which some of you might know of, this being Scandinavia. Anyone know the Micro B? Yay!
I have one.
You have one, excellent. So the Micro B was, here's the money shot. The Micro B was exported to Scandinavia. And so what we did with this part of this small project was to try to bring together people who don't usually talk to each other, who we think have a lot to share and to benefit from each other. So the Micro B Software Preservation Project has been trying to image all software and gather all documentation available for this platform, but some of it was in non-lending libraries, out of their reach. Enter State Library of South Australia. So what they did was interlibrary loan all the software and documents down to Adelaide, and we brought Alan Lawton, this man, across to our lab, and he brought his Micro B and his dongle and all his other equipment and showed us how to do it and image this software that was previously out of reach to his group. So, win, win, win on about 3 counts. And I have so here we go. This was in a university library. This is local content. WesSoft from Western Australia, the department. Many education departments had their own software development arms in the 1980s, and they were developing for the computers that were in schools. So this is some of the content on a historically anachronistic flat screen, of course. And some very local content there. All right, so there's significant overlaps between fan history and cultural institutions' involvement in game history. I've shown you already in our experience that we were working with fan preservationists. And Nick Richardson expressed this really eloquently in a recent seminar at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image. And he said, where do we sit as an institution in our collaborations with enthusiasts? How do we sit as an institution? What is it that we're trying to collect here? Are we the champion of that? How do we build a community that can be mutually supportive? How do we begin to recognise enthusiasts as professionals in the way that we traditionally recognise trained academic professionals? And he was talking about, in reference to an earlier talk in the program, perhaps there needs to be a kind of glass wall, he was saying, between the institution and its priesthood, quote unquote, and the enthusiasts. He said, who we're misnaming enthusiasts. So we kind of lack a language for this. We lack the vocabulary in which to articulate and give fans or enthusiasts their due. Okay, so going forward, this was just the product of that research into disc imaging. We were able to compare the success rates between discs that had been stored in the wild, as it were, in collectors' sheds, and in climate-controlled storage of a major national collecting institution, or state-based collecting institution. Okay, so we actually set out in the Play It Again program not only to bring fans and cultural institutions and researchers into contact, but to pioneer a new relation between the museum and the games community. And how am I going for time, Maria?
Well, if you want to have a Q&A, maybe like 10 more minutes.
Okay. So we built what we called a popular memory archive. I can make this available if anybody wants to read the text in more detail. Perhaps I can give you my slides later. And the Popular Memory Archive was part of our plan to do this, to both display the results of our research and to invite the wider community to contribute to this game history enterprise. It was the idea of Helen Stuckey from way back. She wanted to build a demotic archive, literally of the people, inspired by her use of sites such as World of Spectrum and Lemon 64 over the years that she'd spent as a curator of games. Whenever she had a question, she would turn to the community and they typically had the answer. And she conceived of this as a form of exhibition, adopting the database linked via hypertext that game collectors and fans use. So I just have some slides here, I'll just whiz through them. We've published extensively on the Popular Memory Archive. There's papers in the IEEE Handbook of Digital Games, the Transactions of DIGRA, the ACM Library. Most of them are up on my academia site. And we, of course, put together an anthology also called Fans and Videogames, Histories, Fandom and Archives. So we were interested in the different kinds of discourse that these different kinds of sites can offer, the affordances for discourse, how they differ between the museum and online discussion. And so we did an exhibition of information about 50 locally written games. And this is just an example, Way of the Exploding Fist from Beam Software in 1985, and invited people to upload their memories, their artefacts, whatever they had. And this is all linked so that you can go through and you can see what else was published in 1985, or what else did Greg Barnett work on, what else did Beam Software, who were probably a bit further down the page, develop. And these are some of the comments from Suri, talking about this was one of the catalysts for his curiosity about local game development and how he ended up creating a site like Suomen, which is a local game developers site. We also collected some really wonderful stuff from the public who opened up their photograph albums and shared with us their photographs of play in domestic space. These are not images that are easy to come by. And artefacts also from the homebrew era of the 1980s, which are really beautiful, that show you, I would argue, what it was to develop a game in the 80s. And recovered some software as well through the collaboration of the community. So Matthew Hall had a game that wasn't accessible anymore, and the MicroB Software Preservation Project scanned and OCR'd it and got it working again. And Jules of Sancara Island lived again. Okay, so I think there's potential. I've summed up some of the ways in which we have been collaborating. I think there's potential to do a whole lot more in this space, and I wanted to go on to talk about that. I think collaboration with the industry, this is something that other people have done a lot more of. We have, of course, conducted, that's just a book with the discount code if you want it. We have conducted oral history interviews and collected designers' artefacts, such as this lovely photograph of Roger Keating with his source code for Reach for the Stars. But we're now starting to work more closely with some designers to investigate what's involved in collecting contemporary mobile games. And there's a need for a really kind of close temporal collaboration, as well as interpersonal, when you're talking about contemporary games, because they're gone so quickly. So this is something that we could do more on. Several local game developers have expressed an interest in working on this with us, and this is something that my student Carolyn is working on, which is kind of equal parts exciting and daunting. There's scope to do more, I think, with fan historians. I know that the new game history journal, ROMCHIP, is planning to publish oral history interviews. I think there is a lot more thinking that we could do around how we share the primary source documents that we create in the form of interviews. I know that I would love access to some of the material that fans have got, but the ethical situation there is not clear-cut for scholarly researchers. But equally, I'm happy to deposit what I have for other people to have access to. So I think that's a conversation that's waiting to be had, and potentially the support that we can offer to fan historians. I think there's scope for greater collaboration between institutions as digital heritage initiatives ramp up. I was really interested to note this recent advertisement for a director in the UK for a unified virtual national collection. This is, in a way, a larger scale version of what we're hoping to do in the companion media arts project that I'm running, called Archiving Australian Media Arts, to collate the holdings across different institutions across the nation, with a view to A, making it possible to see who has what, and B, potentially in the future make it possible to access across institutional boundaries. What we already have in reality with the media arts situation is a distributed national collection. And because not all institutions can do everything, it might well make sense to potentially divide up collections along media lines, a kind of devolving of roles, if you will. So for instance, there's an organisation I'm working with, Experimenta, important media arts organisation in Melbourne, been going since the 80s. They have a lot of born digital content that currently hasn't been preserved, but they also have a lot of paper. So we're working with the Australian Centre for the Moving Image on this project that will stabilise the discs, and they're happy to look at the films and the videos, etc., but they don't really want the paper. But the State Library of Victoria happily is set up to, quite well set up, I believe, to accept paper archives. And so there's potential for these collections to go in different directions, still maintaining their integrity, but just being housed in different organisations. Okay, and of course it's a truism, if we're thinking on a bigger scale, that preservation will only succeed with national and international collaborations. There are important global coalitions, and these are going to become, I think, only more important as we go on and build critical mass. So it's exciting, just in the last week or so, to hear that our new partner, ARNet, have recently joined the Digital Preservation Coalition, whose vision is a secure digital legacy. We also have the Software Preservation Network, largely in the US, but also UK and perhaps reaching into Europe. They're doing great stuff and auspicing, I believe, the trial of easy emulation as a service infrastructure that's being run out of Yale University by Ewan Cochrane. So another example, when I get home, I'm off to Canberra a couple of days after for the National Film and Sound Archives Digital Directions Conference for a pre-conference brunch, a digital preservation brunch. I haven't been to one of those before. And we've been tasked with discussing such themes as these and how, in a resource-scarce environment, we can potentially develop some national level infrastructure and support each other going forward. And it's really exciting to me that the other participants will include content management people from the national broadcaster, the ABC, and the chief curator of the National Film and Sound Archive. And I'm expecting that these kind of collaborations between institutions will ramp up significantly in the near future. There'll be some news, I'd say, coming out within a matter of weeks about further initiatives of this sort that will be relevant to games in Australia. And so that's really exciting. Okay, I've talked about, we have the EASY project happening at Yale. And this is, do people know about this? Maybe if I just briefly, they're not only using emulation as a service, the technology that we'll be using to play it again, but they are experimenting with a network across different North American university libraries. And I believe also Living Computers Museum in Seattle might be joining. And what they're doing is not only sharing image-born digital content across the network with other nodes in the network, but they're sharing configurations of the emulator so as to save time configuring the emulator every time you want to view some content. So yeah, this is one to watch. It's really promising collaborative infrastructure at a significant scale. Okay, I thought I'd just wrap up, I suppose, with a brief provocation. I posted this image the other day on Twitter of Game & Watch. I'm not sure what it is. It's the screen of a crystal Game & Watch, and I thought it was beautiful, and it kind of gives me an insight into how these things worked and the way that the movement on the screen is powered underneath, I suppose. And somebody chimed in and responded, "Preserving history," with some applause. Well, which of all the activities that I've described to you is game history, I wanted to ask. I think what we're doing in the Play It Again project is multi-levelled. We're collecting materials and building an archive that makes it possible for game histories to be written now and in the future. But I would distinguish the writing of game history from the activities of researching and building an archive. They're complementary, but they're different. Artefacts might not be history, but the collecting of materials, of course, supports the writing of history, and vice versa. We certainly can't do it without those artefacts and documentation. And with my own game history writing, my book that I've finished just recently draws on some of the accounts that we've collected for Play It Again, and I've contributed my materials and those I've solicited from homebrew authors, and they've gone into the archive. So it's kind of a bit messed up and multi-level, but there are distinct things going on here. I wanted to suggest that I think there is another kind of historiography project that I've mentioned today, and that is the Popular Memory Archive. This is a kind of game writing that's done with the public. It involves participants in performative encounters with historical materials. In this, it's one of a number of histories in experimental, non-traditional formats at the intersections of game studies, media histories, new media studies and digital humanities that experiment with what game history might be, going beyond existing forms such as best-of lists, canons, hardware anniversaries, and the obsession with origins. To me, this is collaborative game history. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Do you have questions?
At least, yeah. There's Patrick first, then.
Yeah. Hi, Patrick Prox, Uppsala University. Thank you, Melanie, for an amazing talk. You mentioned that calling enthusiasts is inappropriate or not really covering it, and I think you're using fans or what other sort of frames for them, notions, words would you suggest, and why?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer to that yet. I think we're still feeling our way towards that. I mean, some people who work professionally in cultural institutions are getting the title digital archivist. And that to me seems to cover some of the terms that are being used, but there's kind of an obsession with whether you're working professionally in this space or not. And so we get titles like amateur, you know, and non-professional, and it's not a strict binary divide, and I think that's what the Nick Richardson comment about the glass wall was trying to capture, something about recognising, I guess, the circuits and the way that knowledge is flowing back and forth. And I mean, the museums have long used and relied upon the expertise of private collectors. So that relationship's not new. But I think it's a good question. I don't have the answer. It's something I think we should continue talking about.
Gleb Eilert, University of Zurich. Thanks a lot for your very interesting keynote. I just have one question, or question and or remark, however. What role do you see, in the preservation efforts, in those that you are involved in concerning Australian games and so on? What role do you see in piracy and former pirates as preservers and collectors? There was this article by Abigail de Kosnik in 2012, which basically argued that pirates play a very important role in preservation when there are no official media archives. And you were talking about many Australian games being rare and not preserved and so on. But I mean, at least on the major platforms like C64 and Amiga, there is hardly any game that has not been cracked and spread. So what role do these informal circulation networks play in your project? And of course the legal implications as well, because you mentioned that you have legal experts on your team as well. I would just like to get some insight into that.
That's a great question too, thank you. I was expecting the IP question. I didn't expect it to come from that direction though. I think that what's going on, I've been I guess watching the Apple II project closely that's been happening at the moment with the Internet Archive. I showed you the Apple source image and the visualization, etc. And these unofficial archivists are now doing such important work. And I know that your own work speaks of, what the role that pirates have played in the past. Clearly it's critically important. Perhaps I can answer it, I mean, you know more about this than I do, so I'll defer to your expertise. But perhaps I can answer it by saying the anxiety that was there when we began this project about the legal basis on which we could preserve games. And it turns out in Australia it's actually quite strong. We have several defences against infringement in our Copyright Act. So we're actually on very good ground, and there's been some changes even since then, which I'm not entirely across, about fair use and access for people with disabilities that provide a lot of scope for institutions to do more than they could previously. But that anxiety, I would say, has just diminished so much that it's hardly there anymore. And that's remarkable over a period of, I'm at this point now where I can kind of look back and go, well, we started in 2012 and I remember how anxious people were. And it's not really even an issue that gets talked about anymore. We are with our this is easy. We're doing emulation as a service. We are looking to, at the moment anyway, primarily do things within the walls of the museum, which is a different environment to putting things online. But I know some institutions are looking beyond that, some of our partners. And so I think that we're perhaps in a moment of rapprochement where the important work that crackers have done in the past is about to, I don't know if go mainstream, might be exaggerating it, but overplaying it, but receive much more recognition.
More questions, comments? Okay.
Yeah, maybe a comment. I want to highlight a little bit more the general context. So you delivered strong arguments why it completely makes sense to foster the relationship of the heritage sector and the community. And these are, of course, mainly also practical arguments, because the knowledge, the skills, the collections are very much on the side of the collectors and the community. But it's also related to the bigger picture of the digital change of our society, because that means much more participation opportunities for every one of us in the digital sphere. So it's a very, I think, general movement which is going on, that we, in all sectors of our society, has somehow to offer opportunities to participate, and we can do that because of the digital technology, which in former times you had to write a letter and wait for an answer. It's of course much more powerful systems now available to enable that participation. And so what you described is part of a much bigger change which is going on, and I think will not only influence the way heritage institutions which are donated to our digital heritage will work together with communities, but this will happen also in other sectors. So it's a big change, and it's great to see you and your colleagues not only claiming and describing that change, but using it for research, for gaining knowledge since many years. And so that's maybe also a comment from my side.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we were speaking about this a little bit earlier, and my research has really gone sideways. Games were the ones that were, you were doing this a long time and making that argument a long time ago, Andreas, and have been making that argument for a lot of years, and it's like everybody else has just caught up and is catching up. And so it's great to see this broadening out and to get a media arts preservation project up. And I had to make that argument about, well, why am I the person to lead a media arts preservation project, and hope that media arts gatekeepers would, knock it on the head. But it is true that though they've traditionally been seen as separate realms, there is increasingly proximity, and they're coming together, and the techniques of one field are being applied to the other with, say, the Net Art Anthology, the Rhizome LED work that Dragon Espenscheid's been doing in New York, and the Cornell University project I mentioned. And I'm so excited with your work that's happening with the demo scene proposal. So, and to be invited along to have brunch with people from the national broadcaster who are also concerned about how do they preserve dynamic web content, no doubt, and other parties who are starting to think about the longevity of digital media, complex digital media materials. This is a really exciting moment. I think there's a lot of potential there for us, to collaborate with other organisations with similar goals. Is there a question just here from Patrick?
Okay, one more question. You have been talking about emulation as a service, but I also know that you are doing work that is sort of addressing the digital divide, the place where digital media doesn't necessarily give you more freedom but excludes a lot of people, and there's a lot of work happening in, for example, preserving games of indigenous cultures, indigenous populations, or other sort of disadvantaged groups before. So is the reason that you're calling it emulation as a service that you have to be business facing what would you say about emulation as a utility? Yes, like as a public service, as something that isn't something that has to be commodified, or is there some sort of logic in there? Do you smuggle?
It's not being commodified. It's an open source product. We're not the developers of that. It's come out of the University of Freiburg. You want to speak to that, Andreas?
Please go on, but I can also
Yes. So I think the rationale behind it is to get material accessible. I don't think it's about setting up artificial.
Then maybe then I add some thoughts to make clear what emulation as a service is, because I know them since many years from the University of Freiburg. It's a non-profit open source project which is more or less only a framework around the emulators which are developed and still safeguarded by the community. They are not programming the emulators, they are producing the framework which enables somehow the people to use these emulators remotely. And so that also means, like Melanie just said, it's much better accessibility if you if you could access the games heritage or other historic programs remotely. And so, in my opinion, this surely will be the future in regards of accessing our games heritage. Of course, you have to consider that the original interfaces are missing. That's of course important, but that's also important if you are using a emulator on your computer locally. And so these issues you have to be in mind. But emulation as a service is the institutional way to use emulators and to offer digital heritage to the citizens.
And Ewan Cochrane has just been offering. Oh, we've lost it.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I was just bringing this up to show you, not to check my mentions, just to show you on Twitter this morning when I was awake at 5 a.m. I was chatting about getting a spiffy new drive with emulation as a service infrastructure on it. So if you'd like one, just DM him and he'll send you one. This is out of the North American.